Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames.
Okay, good evening. It is time to get into our reading. It is Star Wars night. So, jumping straight on into it, I noticed last time I intended to read through page, chapter 31, but I ended at the end of 30 instead. So, we're going to pick up 31 tonight, and that's also starting part 5 of the book. I think that's why I ended it there. So, without further ado, Fatal Alliance is actually the name of this chapter, Fatal Alliance. Chapter 31. Did you have to bring her back with you? Laren whispered to Ula as she escorted the passengers of the Auriga Fire to the Commoner's conference room. I don't trust her. The envoy adjusted his collar as though he was feeling too hot. No choice, I'm afraid. Darth Kratos was insistent. Well, he didn't offer to put one of us in his on his command deck. I suppose he wouldn't offer, given the choice, and I'm afraid I didn't think to ask. I thought the Sith would be valuable as a hostage, that's all. I suppose she will. Noticing Ula's discomfort, she forced a smile. Hey, look, I'm not saying you didn't do your best. I'm just glad you got us this far. No one else could have done it. She patted him on the shoulder with her prosthetic half hand. Thanks, he said, looking embarrassed. I'm glad you think so. She couldn't help a smile. His social awkwardness was both touching and puzzling. How had anyone so clumsy ever risen so high in the Republic administration, let alone survived an audience with the Dark Lord of the Sith? Perhaps Darth Kratos had taken pity on him. That seemed rather unlikely. The Sith apprentice, Eldon Axe, walked steadily between Master Satil and Shigar, surrounded by an entourage of business-like soldiers, all holding rifles at the ready. Her wild-haired head was held high, and she took each step as though fighting the urge to spin and fight. She was like a wild animal, held barely in check. I don't trust her, Laren repeated, and I'm good at reading people. Beside her, Ulla cleared his throat, but said nothing. The meeting was uncomfortable from the beginning. Captain... It switched gears here. I don't know. The meeting was uncomfortable from the beginning. Captain Pippolides' crest was a deep purple, and her basic difficult to understand, as was often the case with Anx, or Anx, A-N-X, um, whose voices tended to be so deeply pitched that they bordered on the subsonic. Shigar swore he felt his rib cage rattle on a couple of occasions. The captain first ordered all non-essential personnel out of the room. Laren was one of those, and Shigar caught the hurt glance she shot him. There was nothing he could do about it, though. He had no power here. Colonel Gurin had no opportunity to confirm his succession plans to me, said Master Satil, but I know he had the highest regard for you, Captain Pippolidi. He would be glad to know that the fleet is in reliable hands. May it remain so, the captain growled, with a sharp look at Eldenax. The implication was obvious and twofold. Many of the military harbored hard feelings for the Jedi after the events leading up to the Treaty of Coruscant, when the Order had been deliberately trapped between the Empire and the Mandalorians. The closing of that trap had left the Republic divided over the role Jedi Knights should play in future conflicts. Some even went so far as to mistrust the Order entirely, preferring to leave them out. The fact that Master Satil had brought a Sith to the negotiating table only confirmed those mistrustful feelings. My enemy is our enemy, said Axe. That makes you useful to me, and vice versa. Captain Pippolides' crest turned bright orange. We do not need you, you murderous witch child. Enough, said Master Satil, raising both hands. This won't get us anywhere. The fact is that we do need her, Captain Pippolidi, and the Imperials are as well, so we must negotiate accordingly. Have your analysts confirmed Dow Striver's calculations? Yes, the captain raised herself up to her full height, making her the tallest person in the room by more than a meter. I have sent a long-range probe droid to convey a message to the Supreme Commander, but I do not anticipate a response of any kind within a day. The chance of Stantor's sending a fleet on the basis of one message is remote, Master Satil said, and by the time it came, Sebadon would be boiling over. Yes, that single syllable conveyed a weight of import. For all her dislike of the situation, at least the captain understood its significance. I don't understand why Stryver didn't tell us this earlier, said Shigar. And as it stands, we have just 15 ships now. If we'd combined both our fleets on arrival, it would have been over 30, if he'd warned us. Would you have believed him? Asked Ulla. No, said Axe unexpectedly. I tried to tell my master about the hexes, but he didn't listen. Shigar didn't add me too, but he could have. So Stryver let us take a hammering just to make a point? If we'd been beaten, that would have done no one any good. I'm sure he has his reasons, said Master Satil. The same reason, possibly, that he's the only one of his kind here. If the Mandalore feels so strongly about this, why wouldn't he send more to back us up? Perhaps he wants us to do his dirty work for him. Or he doesn't think his people are up to it, the young Sith said. Shigar met her quick gaze. If they shared one thing, it seemed, it was a mistrust of the Mandalorians. 15 ships, mused Captain Pippolidi, including one bulk cruiser. Axe said, we have 3,000 frontline troops divided across the remains of 3 regiments, repulsor lift, heavy weapons, and armored with 200 TRA-9 battle droids. We have shuttles sufficient to land them and support them, but we lost much of our munitions when the ships carrying them were destroyed by the hexes. Are those figures accurate? Asked the captain suspiciously. I have been ordered to withhold nothing. It is to our benefit at the moment not to do so. In that spirit I will offer the same. 3,500 troops, 2 full regiments, repulsor lift, and armor. Our wings here were in the air when their capital ships were destroyed, so most of the fighters themselves survived. Hangar decks are crowded, though, and refueling options limited. We have the same problem, said Axe. Colonel Kalish sent raiding parties to salvage what they could from the infected vessels, but none returned. One came back infected. We destroyed it. We noticed. Our intelligence staff is working double shifts, watching everything around the planet. Not helped, of course, by the fact that we were short-staffed to begin with. The captain's tension visibly eased as she and Axe exchanged details of losses and setbacks. Shigar had heard how battle lines could be blurred on a war's bloody front. This was the first time he'd seen it in action. Perhaps Stryver's unlikely plan had some merit after all. Ula broke into the rapid exchange of intelligence. Every minute we stand around chatting, he said, Zandret's droids build more of themselves, more factories, more who knows what. If we're going to stop them, we have to start making solid plans, and fast. Agreed, said Master Satele. Our number one priority is stopping the droids from getting more than a toehold in orbit. While their factories are confined to the surface of the planet, it will be possible to defeat them. A whole planet with just 15 ships? Asked one of the captain's senior officers, and just one bulk cruiser? The hard-skinned major shook his head. No matter how you divide it up, it's impossible. Only if we tell ourselves it is, said Shigar. Stryver's data clearly showed how the hexes radiate outward from a central point, the main hotspot your ships bombarded, he added with a nod to Axe. I think it's safe to assume that this was where Zandret and the others founded the colony's capital. Destroying it didn't take out the hexes' coordinating intelligence, but must have hurt it enough to move elsewhere. If we look for the place that's growing the fastest, that'll be the place to hit. We have identified 2 such locations, said Captain Pippoliti. A hologram flickered to life between them. Here and here, she said, indicating one spot at the equator and another at the South Pole. Perhaps the hexes have decided not to put all their eggs in one basket this time. Shigar studied the image. The site on the equator was in the middle of a vast sea of lava, dotted with islands of solid stone. The polar site was much more stable, straight lines radiating from it in all directions, leading to other spots elsewhere. That's a factory, he said, pointing at the pole. Perhaps the master factory, where everything else originates, and that's the brain, he said, transferring his finger to the equator. How can you possibly know that? Asked Axe. Because factories need physical means to get things in and out. Resources, power, finished droids. That's what these are, he followed one line from point to point. Roads or railways of some kind, or power cables. And brains don't need anything of the sort, she said, nodding. It can just sit there, isolated in the middle of that mess, sending orders out by radio. I think you're right, Shigar. Master Satele moved around the globe, rubbing her chin. Teams striking both at once, plus targeted bombardment at the secondary locations, should be enough to slow the hex's growth. Enough to stop it, perhaps, said Captain Pippoliti, until reinforcements arrive. There was an uncomfortable silence. Shigar knew as well as anyone that once the threat of the planet was reduced to 0, the alliance would break. This moment of solidarity was both fragile and temporary. No one had forgotten that the Sith and the Jedi, the Empire and the Republic, were anything other than mortal enemies. Let's worry about reinforcements when they get here, Ula said. Captain Pippoliti, would you be willing to sketch out a basic plan now to pass on to Darth Kratos and Colonel Kalish for their opinion? I suggest dividing resources evenly over all tactical objectives to ensure that both parties feel that they are included but not exploited. plus double the usual number of commanding officers to each platoon. Discipline must be maintained. We don't want the troops shooting one another in a critical moment. Naturally not, said the captain, with a bluish cast to her crest. Shigar didn't know what that meant. Irony, perhaps. Shigar caught another glance from the young Sith's direction, bored this time, and again he sympathized. Their duel in the hut's security airlock felt a lifetime ago. His lightsaber hand twitched, but he kept it carefully limp at his side. The door to the conference room hissed open. Laren was taken by surprise. She had long ago given up trying to read the lips of the people inside. On seeing a major, she automatically stood to attention. Private Hetchkey, a moment, said the sturdy Laren. You too, Moxla. Laren followed Hetchkey and the major into the conference room. The air seemed much denser than normal, as was always the case during long planning sessions. A current projection of the planet hung in the center of the room, dashed and dotted with notations in yellow and green. People huddled around it, taking suggestions. The Sith girl was one of them. Both Shigar and Ula looked up as Laren entered, but it was the captain who spoke. We're sending strike teams to 2 locations, she said in a voice so deep it hurt Laren's breastbone. One long finger stabbed at the globe. Here and here. We need people familiar with the hexes to guide each team. Both your names have been mentioned for the assault on the Master Factory. Private Hetchkey, your detail was with the envoy under the authority of Supreme Commander Stantors. I don't outrank him, of course, but I can promote you above the rank required for an escort. No one would dream of wasting a lieutenant on such a detail, and we're short of officers. Will you accept this assignment? Yes, sir, Hetchkey saluted, looking like he was equal parts delighted and terrified. This was not only the fastest leap up the chain of command imaginable, but it could also be the briefest. And what about you, Moxla? Forgive me, sir, but I have a history. So I'm told. I don't care what happened back then. You're the closest thing we have to Special Forces now. So I'd be insane not to use you. All that matters is that you'll follow orders and be followed in turn by anyone who has any doubts. Do you think you can manage that? Her face was burning. In the service again. She didn't know whether to kill Shigar or kiss him. Yes, sir, I do. I will. Good. Major Cha, take them to the quartermaster and have them kitted out. I want them briefed and ready for action within the hour. Yes, sir. The Laren saluted and guided them toward the door. Laren felt as though she were walking through a weightless vacuum, not floating exactly, but cut loose from everything. One touch and she would tumble out of control. The major chuckled once the door was shut behind him. You should see your faces, he said. Well, I can't really see yours, Hetchkey, but I can imagine. Are we really going to attack the planet, sir? You bet you are. Are you up to it? I'll do my best, sir. That's all we can ask of you. What we expect is a different story. In no time at all, they reached the Commodore's expansive technical storeroom. Laren gazed hungrily at row after row of clean armor shells, up-to-date weapons, and apparently endless cases of ammunition. She knew this wasn't a big ship, so the stores weren't as extensive as she imagined, but it was so much more than she had seen in a long time, she almost wept. Here we are, Sergeant. Sergeant, these 2 lieutenants find themselves sorely under-provisioned. Make sure they're equipped with everything they need and do it on the double. Yes, Major Cha. The swarthy sergeant took charge of Laren and led her into paradise. What about the Mandalorian? Axe asked when the stunned troopers were gone. What role does he play in all this? She hadn't forgot her vow. I will kill you, Dow Striver, or die trying. Apart from supplying any other intel he might have, said the captain, I expect him to join the fighters sweeping hexes from orbit. It might be difficult keeping him out of play, said one of her officers. Mandalorians love nothing better than a good fight. He's done a very good job of staying out of this one, said the Padawan with a shrug. Maybe he'll be content with that. Axe kept her feelings to herself. She would be hundreds of kilometers away from them, then, intent on destroying the droids coordinating intelligence, but she would advise her master to keep an eye on Stryver's scout, in the hope that it strayed too close to an Imperial ship. In the chaos of combat, missiles often went astray. She wanted him dead, even if she couldn't deliver the killing blow herself. One of our signals officers believes the hexes identify us by our transponders, said another alien on the captain's staff. We could feather our drives, confuse them. Better yet, said the Padawan, we could avoid drives entirely. What do you mean? Shuttle to low orbit, free fall straight down from there, then shoot onto the targets. Shoot being parachute. Chute. Axe was impressed. She liked that plan, despite herself. It could work. We'll show up on radar, of course, but they won't know what we are. Toss out a bit of junk with us, and they might even mistake us for debris. The captain was nodding. Excellent. The only thing left to decide is who has overall authority. There was another awkward silence. Axe had known this moment was coming. Darth Kratos or Colonel Kalish, we have the bulk Kratos. Bulk cruiser. But we have more ships, said Captain Pippoliti. Master Shan should make the call, said the Padawan, with perfect predictability. Her foresight is legendary. Does she know how this is going to end? Axe asked him. I do not, the Grand Master said, but I do know that we'll never agree on this point. I suggest we give someone else the authority to oversee this engagement. Not the details, but the key strategic moments. Someone who we have already trusted to act as a go-between in difficult circumstances. All eyes turned to Envoy Vi. I would be honored, of course, he said, but Darth Kratos will accept this proposal, said Axe, enjoying the way the traitor squirmed. So will I, said the captain. On one condition, Axe added. We must be sure that Envoy Vi is acting independently, not under any kind of distress or influence. As we cannot guarantee that he will do so here in a Republic vessel, we require that he be stationed elsewhere and remain in constant contact with all parties. Not with you, said the captain, or Dow Stryver. Nebula's ship, said Shigar. The Grand Master nodded. The Eureka fire. Envoy Vi's larynx bobbed once, twice, then he visibly got himself together. I will accept this responsibility, he said, on the assumption that my instructions will be followed to the letter. There's no point having me in this role if you won't listen to me, all of you. He was looking at the captain, who nodded. Clearly, a civilian authority was better than either a Sith or a Jedi. I will play my part, she said. Darth Kratos will too, Axe said. I'm sure Envoy Vi will do the right thing by all of us. He glanced at her, and she saw the terror in his eyes. He understood very well indeed what she had meant. Fairly long chapter here. Okay. While the Sith apprentice relayed the orders to her master, Ula took a moment to review the plan in his mind. Primary and secondary objectives were now defined. There would be 3 teams. The first would clear Sebadon's orbit so that landing parties could get through. The second, led by Grand Master Shan, would attempt to destroy the droid's coordinating intelligence, their version of him, he now realized. No doubt the Hexes would be seeking to take him out in return. The third team would be led by Major Cha, with Laren and Hetchke backing him up. They would drop into the Master Factory and prevent the droids from creating a new CI. Ula's job was to oversee it all and somehow to stay alive. The Jedi Padawan came in close. I don't know what you told them, Shigar whispered, but you've got the Imperials jumping exactly in time. Ula looked up from the holographic globe. It was nothing special, he said, hiding many layers of truth behind a simple lie. They're not monsters. They can be made to see reason. Shigar's doubt on that point was impervious. However you did it, keep it up, and you'll be Supreme Chancellor one day. Not if I'm caught. Ula was well aware of how agents were punished by both sides, but part of him was flattered by the Padawan's confidence in him. He remembered how Shigar had saved him from the collapsing wall on Hutta, and how Laren had volunteered to accompany him to what must have seemed like certain doom when meeting with Darth Kratos. These acts had been offered freely without promise of reward. He didn't understand where they came from unless they genuinely thought him worth saving. Him, he wondered, or his false face. Either way, he felt somewhat buoyed by their regard. The Mandalorian agrees, said the Rillaran major, looking up from a separate holoprojector. Intel and surveillance, engaging only as instructed. Darth Kratos concurs on all points but one, added the Sith apprentice on returning to the huddle. He will fight with Master Shan during the assault on the CI, and I will fight too. The Grand Master nodded slowly. Very well. My Padawan will be part of the strike force, so that is only fair. Excellent, said Ula, playing the part of mediator with something like aplomb. He hoped. We are agreed. All that remains is to begin. No time like the present, I say, Captain Pipoliti rumbled. My sentiments exactly, said Ula. I will retire to the Auriga Fire and set up my command post there. On notification that all is in place elsewhere, I will give the order. Nothing is to commence until then. Understood? They understood well enough, and he was under no illusions either. It was all an act, a hasty bandaging of cracks that would inevitably tear the alliance asunder, but while they were prepared to play, so was he. Captain Pipoliti clicked her fingers, and an escort fell in behind him. They marched him through the ship to where the Auriga Fire remained safely docked, then left him there. The smuggler looked up when he entered the cockpit. How'd it go? Could have been worse, Ula said, falling into the co-pilot's seat. They put me in charge. Well, good for you. That's the seat to be in if you want to skim a little profit. I'm not interested in doing that. So what are you interested in? That was the question, Ula supposed. Was it to give the Sith what they wanted and thereby perpetuate their deadly regime? Was it to provide resources for the Minister of Logistics in order to further his dream of a more balanced imperial society? Or was it something else? He'd always thought of Coruscant as cursed. Only now did he realize just how easy he'd had it there. Out here the issues were the same, but the blasters aimed at his temple were much, much closer. And that is actually the end of that chapter. It was kind of a long one. So we're on to chapter 32, and let me just see how long it is. Oh, it's a shorty. Okay. And then 33 is also a shorty. Okay, well. That's all right then. I'll get through 3 chapters tonight. Chapter 32. Laren looked out a transparent steel portal and wondered if she was dreaming. The Commonor was stationed in close orbit around Sebadon's lumpy moon, in lockstep with the other Republic ships. The Imperial vessels had occupied a different orbit, but they were steadily falling into line. Once the fleets merged, the first attack run would begin. She would be heading down to the surface with the other soldiers to fight the enemy where it lived. Until then, there was nothing to do but stare at the view. As Laren watched, an almost surreal conjunction occurred before her eyes. The moon, Sebadon, and the dramatic spiral of the galaxy formed a straight line with the jets of the black hole aligned at right angles, creating a stellar X. It reminded her of the Cross of Glory, the highest military award given by the Republic. She didn't believe in omens or any kind of future-telling at all, really, despite talk of Master Satil's abilities in that regard. But she decided to take it as a good sign. Everything was lined up. Everything was perfect. When the conjunction broke apart, she turned away from the viewport and tested her new armor. The suit was clean, fully charged, and equipped with everything she had ever wanted. All the pockets were full, all the seals checked. Her joints moved smoothly, without impediment, and provided assist when requested, without jarring or losing control. Her helmet was a little snug, but the quartermaster had assured her they all were these days. The newer designs were better equipped to prevent head trauma in even the most extreme situations. She would take a little claustrophobia in return for knowing her skull was safe. In the mirror, she was unrecognizable, and that wasn't just because of the lieutenant insignia on her shoulders. "You have fingers," said a voice from the entrance to the ready room. She turned, saw Shigar standing there, freshly kitted out in the Jedi version of uniform and armor. Browns and blacks mainly, with loose folds of cloth hiding compact armor plating. "That is Laren, isn't it?" he added with a sudden frown. "Yes," she said, snapping out of her daze. She tugged the helmet off with her left hand, which, as Shigar pointed out, now had individual digits. The new prosthetic wasn't permanent. It was just a step up from the crude paddle Ula had found on the Iriga Fire, but it could hold the stock of a rifle while her right hand pulled the trigger. It could type digits into a keypad. It could point. "It'll do," she said, feigning nonchalance. He came deeper into the room, so they were standing at arm's length apart. "We're breaking orbit in 10 minutes. I wanted to say good luck." Her stomach roiled. She had plans to go over, equipment to check, troops to address, and the jump itself, waiting at the end of all that. She hadn't dived from orbit since basic training. Only crazy people did it by choice. So many things could go wrong. She was acutely aware that this could be the last time they ever saw each other. "Who needs luck?" she said. "You've got the Force on your side, and I have lots of blasters." He smiled. "Does nothing faze you?" "Not officially. Just plasma spiders. Oh, and the smell of Rathan crackers for some reason." His smile broadened. "Good for you. Frankly, I'm terrified." Her stomach rolled as though it were in free fall. "Actually," she said, "this kind of thing makes me a little nervous." She leaned closer to him, moving quickly so she wouldn't change her mind, and kissed him on the lips. He pulled away with a shocked look on his face. "Laren, oh, I'm sorry, I don't—" "No," she said, face burning. "I don't think of you that way," he's clearly been about to say. They were words she didn't want to hear. "Don't apologize. I'm sorry. It was my mistake. I thought—" She stopped. They were talking on top of each other, and his face was as red as hers. She was suddenly afraid to move, to do or say anything lest it be utterly misconstrued. Where had the natural banter between them gone? What had happened to the connection she'd been sure was there? If she was sure of one thing now, it was that prolonging the awkwardness guaranteed nothing but more of the same. "I guess this is goodbye," she said, "for now. Good luck to you, too, Shigar." "Thank you," he said, and although she couldn't look at him, she knew he was looking hard at her. "Thank you, Laren of Clan Moxla." Then he was gone, leaving nothing but his smell behind. She pressed her face into her hands. Flack, 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 flack. "What's wrong?" asked an entirely new voice from the doorway. It was Hetchke. She blinked up at him and tried to focus on something other than what an idiot she felt like. "Nothing, just getting myself in the mood." "Our platoons are assembled," he said. "What am I going to tell them?" He was as scared as she was. "Nothing but the truth," she told him. "That you'll kick them in the cargo hold if they make us look bad." She scooped up her helmet and followed him to the briefing rooms. Hetchke's was first in line. With a deep breath of his unique atmospheric mix, he plunged inside. Laren's was third along, and she had barely enough time to compose herself before getting there. She was a lieutenant in charge of a vital mission, she reminded herself. She had survived 2 encounters with the droids of Sabadon before this, and now she had also survived the most embarrassing romantic encounter of her life. She was Special Forces trained. What could a bunch of low-life grunts possibly do to throw her? Well, well, said a voice from the troops assembled in the room, if it isn't Toxic Moxla, the snitch from Kifu. There in the front row was the Zabrak who had challenged her on Coruscant. Perfect, she thought. Just fraggin' perfect. Axe looked up at the Padawan entering the staging area. There wasn't literally a cloud over her head, but there might as well have been. Oh, over his head, sorry. His face was shadowed, overcast, on the brink of some kind of internal storm. She moved out of the corner she'd found for herself, far away from the Republic throng, waiting for the shuttle to launch, and crossed to him. You're angry, she said. Only at myself. He tried to shrug her off, but she wasn't letting him go so easily. That's the first time I've seen you this way. It's an improvement. He gave her a scathing look. What are you talking about? Anger is a good thing, she said. It frees you, makes you stronger. That's a lie. Anger is a path to the dark side. You say that as though it's a bad thing. She drew him closer to her. You know, you fight pretty well. Imagine how much more powerful you could be if you could shrug off the repressive ways of your masters, and don't. He wrenched his arm free. Your mother was angry too, and look where that got her. She recoiled. What did you plan to do to her when you found her? She let the truth of that show on her face. Anger and hate bleed everything dry. He stalked off. Axe didn't smile until she was sure he wasn't looking. His disgust made him beautiful, and that was reward enough for her. Shigar put as much distance as he could between himself and the Sith girl. She was pretty, but her face hid a foul heart. Best, he told himself, to stay well away. His revulsion was inevitably entangled with feelings of regret for Laren. How could he have handled that encounter so badly? He should have been less astonished, gentler. Was this what Master Satele had meant about being kind? Excuse me. His master came up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. He felt instantly calmer, as though she had sucked the tension out of him. We'll be descending in the shuttles. Same shuttle, she said. Imperials and us alike. You will meet far worse. I know, Master. She just took me by surprise. That is ever their aim. When I was a Padawan. A clang of metal on metal cut her off. The external airlock hissed open. A squadron of Imperial of blah, a squadron of Imperial soldiers marched in, matching the Republic contingent, one for one. This was clearly the squad that would be joining them on the drop onto the island containing the hexes, coordinating intelligence. They were human, hard-faced, and heavily armed. Their discipline was impeccable. Not a cheek twitched out of place, not a lip curled. Behind them came a dark presence that turned Shigar's blood to water. A tortured amalgam of flesh and metal, he stood a head taller than anyone else and radiated a deep, bone-piercing chill. He had once been a man, but the dark side had twisted every last drop of humanity from him, leaving a husk that looked barely alive. Only his eyes contained any genuine vitality. From them radiated boundless reserves of loathing. He breathed in hurried gasps as though the air smelled foul, or as though each intake might be his last. A long, thin staff tapped in time with the heavy tread of his boots. I am here, Darth Kratos announced. This operation can now commence. Envoy Vi is awaiting only our personal assignments, said Satele Shan, standing up to him as though he were an ordinary being. When we give them to him, he will issue the order. Refer to him as envoy no longer, the Sith Lord looked down, his twisted nose at her. I will obey no servant of the Republic. Director Vi, then, of Independent Operations Sebadon. She folded her hands patiently behind her back. I will take my Padawan on the first of two assaults from the... No, you will take my apprentice, and I will take yours. That is the only way to ensure impartiality. The words hung like icicles. Shigar wanted to beg his master to deny Darth Kratos this condition. Don't give in to him, he yearned to say. Don't send me anywhere with that creature. He will kill me as soon as your back is turned. Master Satil only smiled. Of course, Darth Kratos. I'm happy to accommodate your wish. Do you wish to divide the rest of our personnel any particular way? They do not concern me. He waved a hand in easy dismissal. Very well. I will assign them randomly. Is that all? His gaze narrowed. Her question made him sound like he was being pedantic, and he clearly didn't like that. The arrangements are sufficient. Master Satil typed rapidly into a datapad. Imperial and Republic comms had been hastily married into one contiguous network, allowing orders to be transmitted from the Auriga Fire via various command vessels. Almost immediately, a series of chimes and spoken commands divided the two cohorts into two intermixed groups. Half would stay behind and launch from the Commodore. The rest would return with Darth Kratos to the Imperial shuttle. Shigar was in the latter group, and he watched with his heart in his mouth as the troops he would soon be leaving behind fell into their new arrangement, spaced neatly and, if awkwardly, across the staging area. In a very short time he would be cast adrift in the world of the Imperials, in the clawed fist of Darth Kratos. Master Satil came up beside him. Once again she correctly divined the source of his disquiet, but this time there was no calming hand. I agreed to Darth Kratos' request, she said, because I cannot afford to trust him. I'm relying on you to make sure he sticks to the arrangement. I'm no match for a Sith Lord, Shigar said aghast. Oh, he won't kill you, she said. I'm sure he has something worse in mind. He understood then. She was testing him, and if he failed, they might never meet as Jedi again. I won't let you down, Master. The Force will be with you. They embraced and went their separate ways. And that is the end of that chapter. Like I said, it was a shorty. So, jumping into 33. Yeah, 33. Shuttle's away, said Jet. Ula fell back into the co-pilot's seat, watching the telemetry confirming Jet's simple statement. The combined Imperial Republic fleet had obeyed his order to deploy. Their mad plan might actually work. In the next hour, 4,000 people would converge on Sebadon singly, there to recombine as attack squads to take out primary and secondary objectives. The Jedi and the Sith would lead the attack on the equator, while ordinary soldiers, including Laren, would attack the Master Factory at the pole. Another 2,000 would remain in orbit, keeping the skies clear of hexes and providing occasional bombardment of the ground below. The rest would provide vital support from several distributed HQs, two of which were on the Commoner and the Paramount, all reporting to him, and to Jet and Clunker. The smuggler had refused all offers of security details, comm officers, and gunners, on the grounds that he didn't want a potentially fractious crew. Choosing one side over another would be politically fraught. Don't we at least need someone to help defend us? Ula had asked him, slightly aghast at how vulnerable that would leave them. Not at all. Clunker can operate the tri-lasers by remote from the bridge. So what was all that on Hutta about needing a crew? Why have you ever needed a crew at all? Jet had smiled. For the company. Ula now wondered if it was for an entirely different reason. For a cover. He had noted how silent Jet was most of the time. When he wasn't play acting the role of a dissolute smuggler, he was watching and listening to everything going on around him. And now, somehow, he had inveigled? I don't know if that's I've never seen that word in my life. I don't know if it's a typo or if it's a real word. Uh, he had inveigled himself into the center of everything. He was privy to every order that came through the Auriga Fire, every piece of information on which Ula based those orders was filtered through Jet's sensors. If Jet pulled the plug, the combined fleet would be left leaderless. Ula reassured himself that this wasn't Jet's style, that if he were ever to try to change the course of the battle, he would do so in a much subtler fashion. Still, Ula would be on the ball for anything at all, and had armed himself with a new holdout blaster just in case. Deploy fighters, he ordered the fleet. Commence bombardment of primary targets. Instantly, the dots in the main display began to shift. 4 squadrons of mixed Mark 6 Imperial interceptors and Republic XA-8 starfighters would strafe the orbital shell of hexes with laser cannons and proton torpedoes, creating holes in 4 crucial locations. 2 of those locations would allow the all-important troop transports access to lower orbit, there to discharge the free jumpers, Laren among them. It was vital they weren't interfered with en route. The other 2 orbital holes would provide critical windows for the bombardment from Paramount, mainly by B-28s with Imperial pilots, in the first engagement. 20% of the missiles launched at the planet had been disabled during descent by interfering hexes. Every shot fired now had to count. The interceptors and starfighters hit the shell of hexes. Space lit up with explosions, sparkling almost delicately in the distance. The Iriga fire maintained a respectful distance from both main attack forces and the combined Republic Imperial fleets, stationed at a point equidistant between the planet and its moon, but it wasn't the only ship ranging freely across the battlefield. "We're receiving a hail from the First Blood," said Jet. "Put him on." "I'm noting an increase in subspace communications," said Dow Stryver in miniature. His face was one of several at the bottom of the Iriga Fire's main holodisplay. The crescent of his ship swept across the battlefield in a silver streak. "Since the black hole warps all attempts to communicate outside the system, I suggest these are all short-range messages originating on Sebadon." "The hexes," said Ula. "Could this be how they communicate with one another?" "It's a strong possibility that this is the voice of the coordinating intelligence. We've detected no other meaningful signals by radio or microwave. Can you locate the source?" "I'm working on it. With 2 more ears listening, I'll be able to triangulate." "Consider it done," Ula said, making a mental note to requisition the resources from Colonel Kalish and Captain Pipoliti. "Launches," announced Jet. "Us or them?" "Them." 2 locations on the globe of Sebadon had been highlighted. 6 missiles were rising on ion engines, their payloads most likely intended to patch the holes the interceptors and starfighters had made in the orbital defense. "Get those transports through," Ula broadcast to the fleet's commanders. "Those holes might not last long." Confirmation came from both sides. A dozen medium-sized vessels broke ranks, accelerating at the maximum capacity of their drives. Imperial Volkov-Strude VT-22 light troop transports raced Celestial Industries NR-2 light transports, each carrying hundreds of men and women, humans and aliens, Jedi and Sith, and combat droids, all intent on doing what they could to crush the Hex threat. I wonder if the hexes can take over combat droids. That's interesting. We'll see. Already he regretted pressing Laren into Captain Pipoliti's staff. It had been worth it for the look of surprise and delight on her face, but what if something were to happen to her? Was that a cost he was willing to bear? "Don't forget what Stryver wanted," said Jet. "I haven't," he said, although it had entirely slipped his mind. "Put me through to Colonel Kalish." The Imperials claimed a lack of resources, and so did Captain Pipoliti when he got through to her. It could well be true, Ula thought, but it was still frustrating. "Not even one ship?" he pleaded. "It doesn't have to be battle-worthy. We can be the third ourselves if necessary." "All right," she said. "You can have my personal transport. Its arms and shields were stripped, so don't put it in harm's way." "You have my word. Thank you, Captain." "Transport's through," said Jet. Ula kicked himself for not paying attention to the bigger picture. The descending troop transports had powered through the temporary gaps in the orbital shell, Most were unaffected, but one was releasing its jumpers prematurely, fighting a swarm of hexes released from a close passing missile. All were accompanied by interceptors and starfighters, which would remain under the shell once it closed, to do what damage they could from underneath. Launch second bombardment, Ula ordered, anything to keep the hexes busy while the free jumpers fell. Confirmed, said Jet. No, wait. Kalish wants to attack a different target. Some of the missiles came from a location that wasn't on our grid. He's requesting permission to take it out. Ula ground his teeth. On the one hand, it was good that Kalish had asked permission first. On the other, there wasn't any doubt in Ula's mind that he would do what he wanted regardless what Ula said. The Paramount was the ship most at risk from ground launches. As the largest in the combined fleet, it was only natural that the hexes would target it first. Tell him to stick to the plan, Ula said, and next time I ask for resources, he'd better comply. He can hit that target in the next round. Jet grinned as he relayed the order. Kalish's response was curt, but he did obey. Where are my ears? Asked Driver. On their way, said Ula, hastily noting that Pippolides' shuttle had left the commoner and was awaiting instructions. Jet sent the pilot permission to obey Stryver's orders within reason and synchronize its comm with the First Bloods. We're your third ship, Ula told the Mandalorian. You can use our location as a fixed receiver. Don't forget to share your data, said Jet. If Clunker can work out their code, we might gain ourselves a better tactic than just blowing things up. You think you could slice into their command systems? Ula asked. I'm not promising anything. Something else for them to keep an eye on, thought Ula, as if there weren't enough things already. One of the ground-launched missiles hadn't exploded in low orbit or targeted the Paramount. It was headed for the moon and coming very close to the Auriga fire. That's either aimed at us, he said, or it's the first escaping factory. First of all, let's get out of its way, said Jet, activating the ship's ion drives. Second, Kalish seems to have it covered already. Ula noted only then the dozen Blackhawks pursuing the missile with weapons locked. He was glad that someone else was on the ball. As the Auriga fire moved out of the path of the approaching missile, he noted that all the free jumpers had left their transports and begun their descent. Behind them came the infected ship. Its drives were locked on full, powering nose first into the atmosphere. That was official fleet policy now. When infected beyond all hope, crew members were to aim their vessel at the nearest target and ditch. Already its skin glowed bright red, and fragments of hull metal were peeling away, providing both cover and hazards for the freefallers. Voices called for him over the comm. 100 data streams awaited his attention. He couldn't sit staring at the holo forever. Good luck, Laren, he thought, trying not to feel like he was saying goodbye forever. I hope this is what you wanted. And that is the end of that chapter. And I think that's a good place to stop. We'll pick up with chapter 34 next time. So, who's on? Well, we've got Vesper. Nah, I'm just going to skip rating tonight. I will just see you all tomorrow night for Forbidden Science. See you then.
to say I I'm just calling to say I